Hi, I'm Sam from Candy Consulting and welcome to Sustain Talks. Today I'm joined by Ben Hart, Chartered Energy Manager and freelance consultant. Hi Ben, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you Sam. Thanks for inviting me along.
Good to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself? You've got quite a lot of extensive experience, so let's hear more about you.
Brilliant, thank you. So I am, as you mentioned, I am a Chartered Energy Manager. I've been for about 8-9 years now, and I've been working generally in the kind of energy efficiency, renewable energy for about 12 years. Over the last kind of 8 months now, I've actually gone freelance, and I'm actually working, as well as working, I'm continuing to work with a couple of interesting clients around energy management, but I'm also working on some really exciting kind of natural capital projects, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, and that was something when we spoke before. I was really interested. Isn't there a particular project that you're working on? I might say this wrong. Is it Bunlight?
Bunlight, yes. So Bunlight Rewilding. So that's a very exciting project, which I'm doing about 60% of my time on, actually. Working with Jeremy Leggett, who is a eco campaigner and eco entrepreneur, who previously set up one of the UK's biggest solar companies called Solar Sanctuary. That was sold last year, and his new project is essentially raising funds, purchasing land, and then rewilding them. So rewilding the estates to increase carbon sequestration, increase biodiversity, essentially grow natural capital.
Yeah, that's great, and it must be very inspiring to work with Jeremy. But can we talk more about rewilding? Because I don't think people really understand why it's so important to the ecosystem.
So the way I always explain it is, and it's an interesting one, especially as being a carbon consultant for the last 12 years or so. It's very much about energy usage, about carbon, about reducing carbon emissions because of climate change, and that's also causing climate change. Now, actually, at the same time as climate change is happening, we also have we're living through the 6th mass extinction. So our ecosystems are collapsing. Our species are dying out. UK species have reduced dramatically over the last, since the 1970s, we've seen something like a 30 or a 40% decline in UK species. So we're in this kind of two sides of the coin, really. We have climate change on one side, which is causing extreme weather patterns and all the things that are happening with climate change. And then you have the kind of ecological emergency, which is the destruction of our natural ecosystems. So rewilding is almost like it's kind of like a rebranded version of conservation. So obviously conservation has been happening for a long time. There's been some very successful projects, but as a whole, the global biodiversity has decreased dramatically. So rewilding as a concept is more about, there's various different definitions of it, but essentially it's attempting to take the reins off nature a little bit and restoring natural ecosystems to a point that you don't actually have to manage them. So a lot of conservation projects are very intensively managed to maintain a particular environment or ecosystem because you have a certain species, whereas actually rewilding essentially lets nature take the reins and says, well, we're going to stop interfering so much and we're going to let natural processes take over, and we're going to support them and guide them and help them. But in the long run, we want the nature to essentially just grow. What we found, what's been found over the last sort of 20, 30 years where this has been happening, is that if you kind of let nature take its own path, you see this massive rebound in biological systems. So, growth in plants and animals, increases in populations, new species, or species that we thought were extinct in certain areas have been turning back up again.
Wow.
Which is very, very exciting. And the prime example is Knepp, which is a farm in Sussex, which is kind of the original rewilded estate in the UK. It's been going for about 20 years. In that 20 years, it's become the most biodiverse piece of land in the entire UK, which is very exciting.
Wow, that is exciting. Do you think we could just all let our gardens grow, and that would help so much then, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's actually some really interesting, everyone's getting really excited by it, and there's some really interesting organisations developing it, specifically looking around that. There's an organisation called Wild East, which is in East Anglia, and it is their aim is to rewild, I think, 30% of East Anglia and the entire region, so Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridge.
Yeah.
What they're getting people to do is to commit to rewilding any areas of land that they have available, including their gardens. So lots of people are signing up saying, I'm going to rewild, I'm going to stop cutting the grass, essentially, leave that patch of land.
I did it. After we spoke, I took a piece of my garden. I was just like, I'm just going to see what happens and just completely let it grow. And there certainly was a lot more insects and bees, and it's just like, and it didn't look bad. It actually looked quite beautiful, So
it's a bit difficult in the UK because we have had this hundreds of years tradition of making everything really neat, and making all the hedgerows trimmed and all the grasses, all the councils cut all the grasses on the side road. But you're right. I mean, the insects is a key point. We're having this insect apocalypse, I think someone's called it.
Yeah.
It's literally the insects are dying out, and of course insects, they live on all those grasses and weeds and stuff that we think of as weeds. But actually, the insects are the food for the birds and all the birds that come through, and then the birds are food for other species, and this whole kind of supply food chain that relies on this kind of stuff. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. You mean you're very, very experienced in sustainability. Tell me a bit more about what that means to you.
So traditionally my career sort of came out of university about 2006 and have done various different roles around helping people and organizations understand their carbon impact. It's mainly around carbon. I've been focusing, obviously, sustainability is a whole area of waste and recycling and water usage impacts on the planet, as it were. But my focus has always been around helping organizations, and I started off with homes back in 2008, sort of working on sort of homeowners in London and sort of helping them identify how you could make your house more sustainable, and then eventually ended up working on quite exciting projects with looking at portfolios of organisations, looking at public sector, looking at council portfolios, and looking at hospitals. I'm working with a couple of hospitals at the moment, one in Bristol and one in Oxford, and universities and organisations like that, where we would look at the entire portfolio of an estate of a client and say, well, actually, you use this much electricity, you burn this much gas, you've got this much oil, you are burning a certain amount of petrol in your estate cars and everything. So how can we, map that all out, map that carbon footprint, and actually how can we then create a plan to reduce it over time? So over the last few years, that's kind of turned into, in the consultancy I used to work for before, which is called Carbon Intelligence, one of the UK's sort of largest, sort of longest running sustainability consultancies. We're very lucky to work with the likes of Tesco's and Aviva Investors and Hermes, Royal Mail, and lots of really exciting kind of large scale organisations. But they're, these are huge beasts, and they have to, frankly, everyone has to create a plan now. So over the last few years, that became a kind of science-based target, which was essentially creating a reduction target for your consumption of carbon, or your carbon footprint, in line with the climate science. And each climate science, it's a science-based target initiative. It's essentially a science-based institute has kind of sort of calculated this is how much carbon we've got left to emit as a global planet or a global society before we, in order to hit 1.5 degrees, or obviously keep things below 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. And then looking at that budget, how much budget therefore has the UK got, for example, and then how much of each sector does each sector make up of that global budget? So if you say I'm a train organisation, I'm a train company, which is one of the ones we worked with, and we have a certain percentage of consumption, and that's as the overall consumption for our sector in the UK, it's 10%, and in the sector we're responsible for 20% of the UK emissions and so on and so forth. So you kind of work out what your actual responsibility is, and then you create a plan, sometimes by 2050, which is the UK target, but ideally sooner, 2030 or 2035. And how do you actually get to that? By installing renewables, purchasing renewable energy, reducing energy demand, looking at electric vehicles, and all the rest of the stuff that comes around.
What's your number one if you could only do one thing then to reduce?
I think the one thing is what the UK has been doing at the moment. The key focus for the last kind of 10 years has really been on electricity and reducing the electric. So in the time that I have been working in this area, we've seen the carbon carbon intensity of the grid reduced by about 50%. So it was kind of 0.5 kilograms per CO2 per kilowatt hour. That's less than 0.25 now. I think. Anyway, point being is actually if you can decarbonize the grid as much as you can, then actually that then leads into electrification of other sectors. So the big challenge we're going to have over the next 10 years is heat and travel. And you'll see, I'm sure you're aware, the boom in electric vehicles that's happening is only going to keep going. So electric vehicles, but in order to have electric vehicles, they're only useful if the energy that is powering them is green renewable electricity. So the number one thing we could all do in our homes actually is just buy green electricity, and you can buy green electricity from most companies. You can also go really deep green, where you can go for the likes of Ecotristing, Good Energy, where you're purchasing energy that actually builds wind farms and solar farms and whatnot.
Yeah, I recently switched to green energy at home, and I'm really pleased to say that it was cheaper than my energy provider before.
Exactly, and there's an organisation called Ripple, which is quite interesting because they've actually, what they do is they basically get people to crowdfund, and rather than just doing crowdfunding and purchasing a wind farm, they actually say, well, you can use your energy bills to essentially buy a certain percentage of a wind farm. So they've just literally closed out on their first wind farm that's being built at the moment. And however many people have signed up to essentially pay for their energy bills, and a certain percentage goes into buying that wind farm.
That's brilliant.
I haven't done it, but you can literally say, I get my electricity straight from a wind farm that I've bought, that I've helped build.
I love that. Like last year, obviously, there's been so many changes for all of us. What's the biggest lesson or the most important lesson that you've learned over the last year?
Most important lesson that I've learned over the last year, gosh, that is a huge one. It's been a pretty challenging year. I mean, I would say that what I have seen, certainly in the consultancy I was working with up to sort of Christmas time, and with my new role in terms of freelance, I'm seeing this massive explosion of green focus. So be it companies saying, right, we now need a strategy, we now need to get on with stuff. New organisations, lots of startups setting up as well. So my biggest sort of takeaway is that actually there's actually lots of positives that have come out of it, because there's lots of negatives. But the green revolution is really starting to get steam. So it's a fantastic place to be if you're. I do a lot of sort of talks and work with organisations about sort of supporting people into this industry. So that's my biggest realisation, is that it's growing fast, which is really important, because actually the other realisation is that actually all of the climate stuff that we're seeing is all accelerating faster than the worst case scenarios of the climate model. So I'm sure you'll have seen all the wildfires all over the world at the moment, and the
floods the other day.
The floods in Germany. All of these are like once in a millennium event, all happening in the same 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's so you've kind of got this kind of dual thing of the climate change is accelerating and it's going faster than the models might have expected. And at the same time, we're kind of rising to the challenge. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the next 10 years we'll actually be able to start to tip the balance. So that's kind of what makes it exciting.
So you and a lot of people, they talk about, and I do as well, about that balance being tipped in the next 10 years, whereas a lot of people say, oh, we need to reach net zero by 2050. Do you think that is too far away, and that actually it's now, do something now, do not wait?
It's an interesting, I mean, if you just think of the challenge, net zero by 2050, if you look at the science, that needs to be a 50% reduction on global carbon emissions by 2030. And actually, global carbon emissions are still going up each year. They reduced a little bit with the pandemic in 2020, and now they're rebounding back. So actually, we've got 9 years to stop growing and completely reduce 50% just to be on track by net zero by 2050. Now, I actually don't think that's going to be good enough, and I think we need to accelerate. But we do have this. So I read somewhere that someone said that humankind hasn't got the ability to understand exponential growth. So actually, there's opportunities, obviously, exponential climate change, but also exponential growth in the systems and solutions. So definitely, I don't think 2050 is far enough away. And I would like to think that, I mean, I don't have kids, but I could be having kids at some point in the next few years. And actually, it shouldn't be. A lot of the problems is kind of people keep thinking 2050 is so far away. It's like another generation can deal with. All my nieces and nephews are all 6. It's their problem. But actually, what you want to say is, well, actually, in 2050, when our kids could be 30 years old, or my nephews could be 30 years old, they shouldn't have to worry about this. They shouldn't be living in they shouldn't be having to deal with the consequences that we've created, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And ideally, by 2050, we should have dealt with it, and we should be. And that's actually one of the reasons I'm working on rewilding and the conservation side of things. Because actually, even if we do hit 2050 net zero, the net bit is really important, because the net bit is all the carbon sinks, the trees, and the oceans that we'll be developing. Fundamentally, we need to keep going with that. So actually, from 2050 to 2100 is actually how do we restore nature and how do we recover systems. So a lot of what I'm working on at the moment is almost setting the ground for what comes after net zero, what comes after 2040 or 2050, if we manage to achieve it.
Yeah, brilliant work that you're doing. And tell me about your goals for the rest of this year and into 2022 then.
So I took the leap into being a freelance consultant at the start of this year. So I was part-time last year, and I sort of took the full jump. So my first goal is actually to make sure I actually survive and pay the bills. Just go one. But yeah, so what's really, really exciting is working with the guys that I'm doing with Up Abundant Rewilding. So that's the key focus. The main goal is to grow and sort of create the right ecosystem, the natural ecosystems, which don't really exist at the moment. There's various different policies that need to come into place to make that work. But if we can make that financially viable, there's already 2 estates that is being purchased, and there is in the summer there's going to be a fundraise for a much larger fund that then go invest in these kind of activities.
Yeah.
On top of that, we're going to be doing a retail crowd fund, so I'll send you a link because that's going to go for Funloy. And the idea is if we can obviously get the investment in, then we can buy more estates, we can rewild and recover. So my key focus for this year is going to be that, is actually making that model work, developing the processes and the systems that we can use to scale that organisation, and then hopefully that more of the same in 2022. What would be amazing with the scale of the fund that we're looking at, it's not just UK based, it's going to have to be across Europe. So ideally what we'll be looking for is a network of rewilded estates across Europe within the next few years, which would be really, really exciting. So that is a key focus. The other one is the 2 hospitals I'm working on and the University of Winchester I've been working on for a few years now and carrying on working with the freelance. They're currently doing some work with a company that I help them procure. And they are essentially going to be taking all of 95% of the gas off of their university campus. We're replacing all the gas boilers with air source heat pumps, so we're taking 90% of their gas footprint off. So that's a big focus for this year. They're currently just in the sort of kicking off the installation stage. Everything's got to be done by March next year, so that's another big focus. I think that's potentially, certainly with the scope 1 and 2, that potentially could be one of the first actual zero carbon universities in the world. They already purchased renewable electricity, getting rid of all the gas as well. So that's very exciting. So those are my kind of key focus areas.
Is that quite a challenge to do that?
Yes, I think it is a challenge, but it's something that we've definitely got to be working on. And I think heat is going to be a really big one. So the 2 hospitals are slightly behind, and we're currently bidding for kind of funding to support the decarbonisation plans, because you can imagine hospitals, massive heat loads, lots of gas usage in those hospitals. So obviously trying to replace that gas is going to be a key focus. So yeah, there's a lot of technicalities, lots of engineering involvement needed, but the technologies are there. It's just a kind of willpower and the funding to actually do it. So, that's very exciting. I think with the university, if that project should be completed, say this time next year or by next March, and that'd be great to see. I think there's more emissions in the scope 3 in the supply chain and all that kind of area, but yeah, it'd be really exciting to have the actual campus itself off of fossil fuels completely, which would be great.
Yeah, and like great to share with other universities as well. I guess with universities, they're all quite old buildings, so that must be quite a challenge as well.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of these campuses, University of Winchester, I don't actually know how old it is, but a lot of these campuses were created in the 1960s, the campus universities, 1950s and 60s. So they're all, they're very old buildings, and they need a lot of work doing to them. On the plus side, university is quite an interesting one because because often they are campuses, they often have a district heating system anyway, and a lot of solutions is going to be kind of looking at that district heating scheme and saying, can we replace the gas boiler in there with a hydrogen boiler or an air source heat pump or something. They're kind of microcosms of society, because they are kind of, you know, organizations where people live and work on the campus. You know, they have lots of different types of characters, and you know, they have their essentially their mini society within a society. You know, university. So they're good places to experiment. There's lots of work that's been done, good work that's been done with universities over the years, I have to say.
Yeah. Before, when we spoke before, you mentioned about ethos. Can you say a little bit more? I'm sure the viewers of the video would need to understand what that is.
Yeah, so ethos is it's called the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. It's a program that's run, well, it's a program, it's a policy, it's a legislation that is actually from the EU, but it's been converted into UK law. And essentially, the legislation requires every large organisation to undertake an energy audit of their major emissions every 4 years. So the first one was in 2015, the second one was in 2019, and the next deadline is going to be 5th of December 2023. So basically, between now and 2023, anyone who's involved in a large organisation, and a large organisation as defined in the policy is either 250 staff or a turnover of something like, I can't remember, something like a asset base of like 40 million euros and 36 million turnover or something along those lines. So it's large organisations, but staff is the easy one. And it's basically, they have to assess their buildings, their processes, and then their transport. So looking at all of the kind of transport emissions, for example, looking at flights and trains and all the rest of it, and then looking at buildings consumption. And then you have to do an audit of your 90% of your consumption, so the major sources of your consumption. So that needs to happen between now and December 2023, and that's going to start ramping up over time. Generally, what we've seen over the last couple of periods is that a few people will bother over the next couple of years, and then 2023, everyone panics. There's no one left to do the assessments, and it's a bit of a mad dash to finish. But yeah, that's definitely coming along the lines. If anyone's interested in working in that area,
yeah, I think that sort of leave it to the last minute is pretty much how everyone has got to where we've got to from being in the climate crisis that we're in. You know, and it's sad that it has come to this, and you know, we have bought too many products and abused the way that we live so much, and we just didn't think about the future, and now it's reaping with us at the moment. With regards to sustainability, what are the biggest challenges that are about to come?
So I think I mentioned that the two biggest challenges, I think, are heat. Heat from a carbon point of view is heat and transport, because those are the two biggest, because electricity's been kind of going down over time. Electricity emissions, and I couldn't keep going down over time, I think, but more wind and solar on the grid, they will become, that's not going to be too bad. So our biggest challenges as the UK are the heating, as you think most of us have gas boilers in our homes, and transportation. You know, there's a certain amount of stock of cars on the road, and there's only a certain turnover. So by 2035, they're going to ban the sale of all petrol and diesel cars. But even then, you know, 60-70% of the cars on the road will still be petrol and diesel ones. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, and I think you'll see some really big changes that start to happen. And I think they'll come a lot faster than you might expect. A lot of the work that's happening around autonomous cars, autonomous no-driver electric-powered vehicles, I think you'll start to see much more of them if they can sort of deal with the legalities of it all. And I think, we'll start to see a shift from car ownership through to actually it's cheaper just to get your Uber or your equivalent, maybe not now, but eventually it would be. So I think stuff like that, we'll start to see some really serious changes. I think heating is going to be the biggest problem, because there isn't an affordable solution right now. If you wanted to replace your gas boiler, you couldn't get a like-for-like equivalent that's not a gas boiler, if that makes sense. Gas, it's just, so I think we're going to see some serious changes. We have to see some serious changes in those areas.
Yeah, it's hard when it comes down to affordability. It does, that affects a large part of the population.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to do it. It's with all the best will in the world. I mean, I would love, put it out there. I would love to be able to get on a train if I had the time. Get on a train and go on holiday to France or somewhere, or I mean, I do if I go to France. But if I was going to go any further, but fundamentally, it costs so much money that we're always going to take the plane. If you can, and I don't think people should kill themselves over that. Obviously, reduce your flights where you can, but frankly, you might not be able to get in a plane in 20 years' time. So actually, might as well enjoy it. But if actually, it's that kind of I think don't beat yourselves up over it, but actually sort of understanding that what you can do, like you say, what you said with the green energy, eventually things become cost parity, and that's where we need to be helping. So with the green energy, for example, it's now cheaper for the most part to buy green energy than it is alternative fossil fuels, which is where we need to be, and that's when you're going to see that mass adoption. So right now, a gas boiler, if gas boiler breaks down, replace it with a gas boiler because that's the cheapest option. In 5-10 years time, there might be a clever fuel cell or an air source heat pump that is the equivalent, and you go, great, I will go for that because it's greener.
I've spoke about this before, but I think also in sustainability, being sustainable is supporting the economy as well. So that do fly, don't fly, whilst you should definitely fly less. If you're not flying at all, then you're not supporting the travel industry, or you're not supporting a lot of business meetings that take place abroad, which I know we've got Zoom, but you can't meet in person in conferences in the same way that you can in person. So I think there's that it's about balance, and at the moment the balance is off, but coming into balance.
No, I think that is exactly right, and I think as these things go on, it will get better. If you think about flying is a fascinating one, because it is the largest. I will go. My wife is Polish, so when we can travel, we will go to Poland to visit my family. It's just too far away to go by train unless you've got 4 days to take a train across Europe, which nowadays, now that we're working from home a little bit more, maybe we can do. But actually, if you think about flying, there is a certain percentage of frequent flyers who are flying once a month, travel for work or for whatever. And actually, realistically, we're going to have to get to a point where there's going to be some sort of balancing act that says if you are going to be a frequent flyer, you have to pay for the privilege of it. And this is where the offsetting comes in. Obviously, the work we do around natural capital is essentially, and that's the way the challenge is. It becomes the kind of your offset. So it's kind of like it can be seen as an excuse to pollute, which is a bit of a shame. Because actually we do need to provide funding to restore these ecosystems. So there's this whole kind of like balance out, and eventually the idea is that if you are reducing your carbon footprint as much as you can, and you are in line with the climate science, and you are working towards a certain goal, and as new technologies come on, you'll be able to replace those emissions that you have with other ones. I mean, there's some great stuff coming in. The aviation industry, for example, there's lots of interesting stuff around hydrogen planes, and a company that does, it's called but basically like does blimps. You can literally go hydrogen blimps and all this kind of very, very exciting stuff. So but it's definitely about the balance, as you say.
My first interview was with Fly Green Alliance, which is all about sustainable aviation fuel. I worked in the travel industry for a long time, so I think that it's already being invested in by some very large companies, and it's great to see that they are trying to bring it more to life. But
just on that, there's only also, it's recognizing there's only a certain amount we can do as individuals, and we can do as companies. Obviously, we need to do our best. Fundamentally, the real changes happen when you get the policies in place, and to get the policies in place, you need the right kind of politicians in place. So obviously we're doing what we are, and we're doing okay with the Conservatives at the moment, but let's be honest, they're not the greenest party we've ever seen. So actually, hopefully over time, as we start to see, as people kind of elect maybe different selections of leaders, and I'm not saying the Green parties are right, although I maybe it's later, but generally, like, there will be more ambitious politicians that come along and more ambitious policies, and then we'll start to see some step change. And certainly in Europe, the Europe Fit for 55, which is a really interesting one to look at. You haven't seen that. It talks about how they are going to create a policy. There's a certain percentage of fuel has to be sustainable, non-fossil fuel based aviation fuel by a certain time as well, and that's when you start to spur the innovation. So it's kind of like do what you can, but also make sure that you're trying to vote for the right parties to get in, so that we can actually amplify that effect, because that's where we're going to see, we need to see the changes in policy.
Yeah, we're coming to the end now, and I always like to ask this question, but it leads into it from, you know, talking of inspirational leaders. Who in sustainability inspires you? Who should people be following or listening to? Who do you listen to?
So that's an interesting question. I have two that I'm interested. So the first one is founder of Rewilding, Jeremy Leggett. He's a hero of mine, so I'm very lucky to be working with him at the moment. And this guy's been he was the original eco campaigner. He used to work for Shell in the 70s and saw the lights, and has been campaigning ever since. He was the scientific director of Greenpeace in the 90s, and had literally built and grew one of the UK's biggest solar companies, which is fantastic. So says it like it is. It's very straightforward, and when anyone else could be sort of settling into a nice retirement and, you know, running off with it, walking off into the sunset with his with the obviously money he's made from the solar company, he's, you know, now embarking on almost like a massively more ambitious project, which is very, very exciting. So, you know, Jeremy, like, very, very lucky to be working with Jeremy. The other one, actually, I always say is James Murray, who's the editor of Business Green. So Business Green is a great. It's got a paywall in it, but it's a good website, and there's a lot of free articles as well if you sign up to the newsletter. But it's a good source of understanding what's going on in the industry. And then James's blog as well is really fascinating, because he's very outspoken, very great commentary. He's also got a couple of young kids, and he talks a lot about being a father in this.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those two I would suggest as people to follow along.
Great. Well, I'm certainly going to look those blogs up. But thank you so much for your time and your insight. This series is completely about education, and, you know, if I can share something that somebody didn't know that they can learn from, then that makes me happy. Thank you, Ben, for your time. I look forward to speaking to you again soon, and have a good rest of the day.
Brilliant. Thank you for the invite, Sam. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
All right.